Greetings, everybody. This is Dave here, and we're out in my barn, not my regular workshop, because I have a new tool in here. I picked up a used early 80s, late 70s Craftsman radial arm saw. This is an era where Craftsman was still building them with plenty of metal on them, and not as many plastic parts as they would have a little later on. Still not good as one of the classic 1950s, early 60s DeWalt's. Big, heavy cast iron things, and I'd love to pick one of those up. And I've never actually owned a radial arm saw before. I've used one quite a bit, but I've never actually had my own. And right now you can pick these up just about anywhere. I wouldn't pay more than $50 for a used Craftsman, and I'd probably pay $100, $125 for a good old 10-inch or 12-inch DeWalt if I could find one. And I want to talk a little bit about these. A lot of people say these are more dangerous than a table saw, or they're the most dangerous stationary power tool you'd ever use. I'll link to some videos in my description here, and I'll let you be the judge of that. But I think they are perfectly fine for what they were designed to do, and that's cross-cutting very long pieces of wood. You can put them up against the wall, and that's a problem I have in my shop. In my shop, it's very narrow. It's probably about 15 feet wide, but about 30 feet long, and I have a workbench built onto the wall. Because of that, on my table saw, I really can't cut an 8-foot timber to length. So this is a way for me to come in here. I get 10 feet on either side of that blade. I know I get a lot of junk over there in the corner, but this is my barn. So I can cut some very long pieces of wood I pick up at the lumber yard. Now, a couple things about this. I replaced the table. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And I want to just talk about a couple little safety things here. On the table, you'll notice here, I painted a red zone. That's my safety zone. I think one of the reasons these saws are so dangerous is I'll show you. And my saw is not plugged in, which is why I will show this to you with my fingers up against the blade here. I'm a very big fan of what we call in industry lockout tagout, where if you're doing something like this, you would turn off power to the tool, and you would actually lock the box. So lockout tagout. This blade rotates in this direction. So when you're cutting, say, a piece of wood here, that blade wants to climb up onto that piece of wood, and it can, what they'd call self-feed. So it can grab and send that carriage flying out towards the operator. So when you're cutting with a radial arm saw, you're actually holding this back more than you're pulling it forward. You're giving it a little bit of forward motion, but you're really controlling that arm to keep that from happening. And also, when you're holding your piece of wood on a radial arm saw, you're holding up against that fence or over that fence and have a good grip on it. Now, the reason I paint that safety zone is it's real easy to get close to that blade. So I get 3 inches on either side here that I've painted red to kind of remind me to keep my fingers out, because we tend to hold things like that. And I actually know somebody who had a radial arm saw industry because they were holding their piece, they were making some cuts, feeding it into a stop, and eventually they got to the point where they were like that. Also, that 3 inches is just a little more margin of safety that if you do have that saw self-feed on you and you panic, it can happen. It's startling, it's scary when it happens. If you do this, trying to get your hand away from it, you have maybe a little bit more if you're 3 inches away than if you're right up against where that saw blade's going to go. So just keep that in mind. Anything really short here, again, you would hold this with a push stick if you had something very small in there, okay? For ripping, a lot of the saws are missing this little thing here. Craftsman started building it in, but there's an anti-kickback pawl for ripping that folds down, and that helps prevent a kickback. And there is one video I am going to link to. The guy says that the gentleman in the video, very smart, very good woodworker, he says that's not kickback, it's ejection. It would eject the piece of wood, so that'll prevent that from happening if you are ripping. Another thing people say about these saws is that they're not accurate. Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. This blade and arm and this table are aligned as good as I could get it to 90 degrees. And I actually took a piece of wood, cut it, checked it with a square, cut all 4 sides, checked it with a square, and it was square over those 4 sides. And the reason I cut all 4 sides of a square is you're stacking the air up. So it would just be getting worse and worse and worse and worse as I went all the way around. And I'm the kind of woodworker, if I can check it with a square and it's good, it's close enough for me. I know some of you guys out there be pulling out your dial calipers, micrometers, indicators. Trust me, it's woodworking, not machining. I'm a machinist by trade. That's what I do during the day. I need a break from that. So it's good enough. I can build projects on this. Good enough. Yeah, not just good enough, as somebody would say. But this would come out. I don't want to adjust anything right now, but I can take this and lock this head out 90 degrees for ripping. But you know what? I would never, ever, once I have this aligned, tilt this arm out 45, 30, or whatever degrees I need to cut, because it's going to be a real bear to get this back to 90. And I think that's where a lot of people get the impression that these things are not as accurate, is they try to do cuts it's really not designed for. It's really designed for cross-cutting long pieces of wood, originally in a sawmill. Big DeWalt, when they invented these back in the 20s, were big 16-inch saws, basically made for lumber mills, okay? So kind of keep that in mind. I'll talk a little bit about the table. I didn't go overboard. There's a lot of guys who'll take these tables and they'll start putting in metal rods to prevent sagging and what have you. You know what? That's a lot of work to put on a $30 sheet of 3/4 inch MDF. What I did do, MDF does have a bow to it. I've never seen it not have a bow to it, despite the fact that some people will say it's perfectly flat. I've never had that as my experience. I glued up 2 sheets against the bow, so they had to come together, clamp together, and they will fight against their own tension. So that made this very flat. Flat piece of wood there. There's no light coming through here. I did actually check it with a straight edge. Very flat table. And then I put the trim on here. Isn't just decorative. MDF likes to ding. And basically, if I bump into this, it gives me a little extra protection. It's just pine. And I put 2 coats of orange shellac on the top for 2 reasons. 1, a little bit of water resistance. And 2, shellac, when it dries, if you don't buff it out and you put a full thick coat of shellac on here, it has a little bit of tooth to it, I'd say. It's just a little bit rough to kind of help you hold things down a little bit better, but it's not so rough that you couldn't, if I did want to rip in the saw, which I don't plan on doing, I still could do that. I'm really just going to use this for cross-cutting myself and maybe some miter cuts with a miter jig. So that's just my radial arm saw in a nutshell, not my radial arm saw in a sawzall. It's been one of those days, everybody. All right, hope you all have a good day. Hope you enjoyed this video, and feel free to like and comment. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.